Amongst the many activities we've organized on occasion of this Bosch exhibition, you may know that in the Netherlands there's a Bosch research project to study the works of Hieronymus Bosch. This Bosch research project published its conclusions, which included the de-attribution of three of the works that Prado has: the Temptations of St. Anthony, the Table of Deadly Scenes, and the Stone. When we were told about this de-attribution, we said that we respected those conclusions reached by our Dutch colleagues, but we told them that we didn't share them. We still thought that those three works belonged to Bosch, and we asked them to read the catalog and come to this press conference to understand what the official position of the Prado Museum is regarding these three works. The Prado Museum may not agree with its Dutch colleagues, but it's not because of the fact that we want to defend our own collections. When someone has proven in the past that a work in the Prado was not authored by whoever we thought was the author, we've had no problem in accepting it. This is the case of this wonderful portrait of Princess Marguerite that was attributed to Velázquez for many years. But then we did a study, we thought it was convincing enough. It was attributed to his son-in-law, Juan Martínez del Mazo, and now it is presented as such in this museum. So it's not a matter of defending, no matter what, our attributions. But when someone gives us evidence, we look at the evidence, and we accept her. In the case of Bosch, we were not convinced. When someone attributes or de-attributes a work of art to a given author, there are three main arguments in favor or against: scientific arguments, documentary arguments, and history of art arguments. We believe that there are no arguments that can deny that these works belong to Bosch. Let's start with scientific arguments. The only scientific evidence that we can use when dealing with Bosch's work are dendrochronology. As many of you know, this allows us to date paintings done on oak panels by looking at the rings of a tree. Well, none of the three works in El Prado Museum, well, what the dendrochronology does is give us a bracket, a period of time during which that oak panel was used. If this dendrochronology studies had told us that this panel dated to 1575, then we would have been wrong. But according to dendrochronology, this panel was perfectly compatible with the life of Bosch. And in fact, the date used by Prado Museum, 1505, 1510, is the appropriate date. Other people say that it was an imitator of Bosch who did it 60 years later, but that doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense for that oak panel to be cut 60 years before it was painted on. The same can be said about this other painting. Dendrochronology is very much in line with the life of Bosch. Here you have the dates on the slide. The Prado Museum says that the date is 1505, whereas our critics say that it was lost original copy. When you look at other works that are not under discussion, we see that chronological brackets are quite close to those of these three works in question. And they coincide very much with the dates that the Prado Museum has given those three works. We also have pigment analysis. This is another technology we can use. And thanks to the studies of our chemical laboratory, we've done chemical studies of pigments of those three works in question. For example, the Temptations of St. Anthony, where none of the pigments, none of the materials used are unusual for Bosch. Scientific studies do not tell you who the author of a painting is, but they do tell you who is not the author. So if we had found pigments from the 19th century, obviously it couldn't have been Bosch. So these scientific studies cannot be used to say this is not by Bosch, but they can tell you whether they could have been painted by Bosch. The second type of argument is the documentary type. In this case, there isn't any direct document involving these three works. There's only one document about Bosch associated to a painting that no longer exists. Documentary, the closest documentary reference, in the case of the table of deadly scenes, this has been used by the Bosch research project to deny the authorship of this work. But it comes from Felipe de Guevara. This is a portrait of Felipe de Guevara by Jan Cornelis Vermeulen. And what this paragraph says, I'm going to read it to you, is that it is true. And anyone who observes Bosch with diligence will know that he was a great champion of decor, and he was very careful with nature, more than anyone in his art. But there was one of his disciples who, out of devotion to his master, inscribed the name of Bosch in his paintings instead of his own name. These are very well-esteemed works, and they're very important works, because this pupil was even more patient and diligent than Bosch, and he used the same color and the same style as his master. So an example of this genre of painting is this table that Your Majesty has. He was referring to Philip II with the example of the 7 deadly scenes. And even though the painting is wonderful, the envy one is so ingenious and so masterly that it could compete with Aristides, the inventor of this type of paintings called Etisi by the Greek. So the question here is, how do we interpret this example of this genre? When the author refers to paintings of this genre, he meant those that observed decorum, whereas the Bosch research project has interpreted this genre as the style of Bosch imitators. And here they included the table of the deadly sins. Well, the truth is that most people in Spanish have used the same definition of genre. But even if we took as good the interpretation of the Bosch research project, we have to say that Philip II was a great collector, but he wasn't infallible. When we look at the inventory of Felipe de Guevara's work, he says he had one painting by Bosch, the Hay Wain, although we know that the Haywain painting that Felipe de Guevara had was not the real one, was not the original one. And then we see some other paintings by Bosch, painted on a different format. So we don't know whether they were by Bosch or not. These were the scientific reasons that were used, and we believed that none of these arguments were good enough to say that these works were not by Bosch. But the most powerful arguments are the ones that you get from contemplating the works. And this is what Pilar Silva is going to explain to us now.
Bueno, vamos a empezar con la mesa.
Let's begin with the table of the deadly scenes. Two of the works that are being questioned, the stone and the table of deadly scenes, are two exceptions in Bosch's work. But that isn't a bad thing per se. It means that they play a different role and a different function. And in the table of the deadly scenes, the exception is that it wasn't painted on oak panels, but on a different type of wood. And it was on poplar. And this was done not in painting workshops. It wasn't the type of paintings. It's done in a different way, in the opposite direction of a vein. And because of this, you need two boards to hide, two panels to hide and prevent any scratches here. It wasn't done to then get a frame. On the back panel, where you see, well, he painted as if it were a frame in dark green. Poplar wood is much lighter than oak wood, and it is used when the painting is going to have a different function because it's easier to handle. It's easier to manipulate. This is not the only example we have. We have other examples before and after Bosch. In the case of Peter Bruegel the Elder, we have this example. We have this David and Goliath, which was produced for a clavichord. The group by Albert Bau. In the Metropolitan Museum of New York, we have this head of St. John the Baptist, also on poplar wood. These were heads that were manipulated and used in demonstrations, and there were even smaller ones that were used to fight against headache. But it is a function that tells you what kind of wood you can use. In the case of the table of the deadly scenes, we don't know exactly what was the function of this work and who commissioned it. We only have the information that it was owned by Philip II. Maybe he used it as a table, or maybe he used it on a ceiling, and that's why it had to be lighter. You have to look at it from all sides, because even though it may have a first view, which is the eye of Christ and his presence telling us that you have to be careful, that God is watching you, we don't really know whether it had any element to move it. In the 16th century, Philip II liked very much things that could be moved and played with. But we know that he had this painting in El Escorial, not in his bedroom, but next to his bedroom. Father Sigüenza told us that he had it next to his books, maybe hanging, but it could be manipulated. It wasn't the usual function of a painting. It wasn't only to be hanged on the wall. If we look at the technique, the preparation is a usual one. This soft gray, this little bit of black and red in the priming coat. It's the usual for Bosch. This work belongs to the end of his life, and therefore it has some things in common with other works from the time, and probably the last work that we have from Bosch, which is the hay wain. So some of the scenes that we will see later on, such as this one, with the judge extending his hand, greed or rage, with this drunken man who's fighting with a monk. Well, the underlying drawings were very varied, and the same with the surface, because if there's something that Bosch liked was not to repeat himself. His ability to invent was his leitmotif. It was a way he worked with great invention and fantasy. So we see that it's not the same all over the painting. There are places where there's more modeling, and we have lines that run parallel, oblique lines, sometimes even straight lines. For example, in the case of furniture, even cross the face, like in the hay wain. You can see that there are sketches here that may not be exactly the same. When you start to look at them and you don't understand anything about the underlying drawing, when you see this and that, you may think that it's not done by the same hand. But when you... Well, it's the same as with other drawings. There can be a sketch, it may be a complete drawing, and it's not always the same. The lines, the strokes are not always the same. In the hay wain, we see how these drawings are sometimes very expressive, and he retouches them, and black. He doesn't mind that you can see the lines. Karen Feldmandel said that Bosch worked from the base to the surface, and we can see that. We can see that on the surface. Here we have this scene of death, where you have those lines similar to the ones from the incomplete triptych. He even produces figures in the last judgment. We can see how he painted some traits such as the eyes, the nose, the mouth, and a few hairs. You can even see it better in the radiograph, but I just wanted to point to some of them. There are amazing changes. No one like Bosch could express this sin, the only one protagonized by a woman, the sin of arrogance. He had organized everything with the same space as with the other capital or deadly scenes, but then he decided to make it smaller and do it differently. He even had a demon here with this thick lines, like in the hay wain. You can see this demon that is running away. You can see the feet and the head between the legs with those lines that are a bit insecure. Thicker, less thick, different lines. And you can see them even here. He didn't mind that they could be seen. Here we see this radiograph, this character that is the one that gives a coin to the judge. So we see that he used some light touches. He worked with space, with paint brushes that were very characteristic of him. This is from The Adoration of the Magi, but if we were to take an example from the Hay Wain, which is closer in technical terms, we would see the same thing. The way he drew the fingers, how he used shade and touches of light, and how he worked. There's nothing that indicates that this is not Bosch. This is Morelli's style. No problem with this. Anyone who studied this style, we seem to forget Morelli. We don't want to be called old-fashioned, but the Bosch project, after collecting all the material from the work, it's really amazing. I haven't had access to that material, only partially, and only what they published from the Bosch research project. And this is their attribution based on the ear. Here we have this Franciscan of Death with the same ears, with the lines. Here we see the surface, the hand. You can see, obviously, the Table of the Deadly Sins is not a perfect panel. There are fractures, there are cracks, we can see in this detail of arrogance, this woman. We see the light in the mouth, the way he drew with parallel lines on the surface, oblique parallel lines. He did this to add color, for example, to Adam in the Garden of Earthly Delights. So you should go to his last stage where he used thicker paint brushes, where they're more impasto, and also in this other example, in the Adoration of the Magi, where you have Saint Joseph heating the diapers, he even used gold to add shine, and we see how he translated in white the part that represents light. This is a dog, but this is not the one I wanted you to see. But this owl that we find in another scene, in this case, gluttony. People from Bosch's team say that whenever there's an owl, it represents gluttony. Well, I had never seen it until, it represents Bosch, sorry, but I had never seen it until we did this radiographs. The technique leaves no doubt that we're talking about Bosch. No one other than Bosch would have been able to make this composition. No one. And even less that unnamed pupil, not even Bruegel, who was a second Bosch. No one would have been able to create something like this. The deadly scenes were represented and portrayed in a different way. Small scenes where we see the worst of society. And this generated, this was the beginning of the great Dutch painting. I think I'm talking too much, but anyways. And here we find the second exception. In this case, the exception is not the base. We have oak panel, we have dendrochronology, we have creeds preparation. Everything is okay. The only thing we don't have the person who commissioned this wanted to pay tribute to this type of shield or coat of arms. The coats of arms that were placed in Hertogenbosch in St. John's chapel. It was a time when Philip the Beautiful received his medal. This was placed there until the French Revolution. Bosch, whenever he went to church, and he used to go to church a lot because he was a member of the Brotherhood of Our Lady, he saw these scenes and these coats of arms. He saw these inscriptions. He saw the shape, which is not exactly an eye, but there's something like it. The inspiration is clear, but Bosch was not going to do this just because. We've heard that this panel was taken stock of in the palace of the bishops of Utrecht. Philip of Burgundy was the son of Philip the Good, the founder of the Golden Fleece order. But he wasn't there just like that. He was in the court of the dukes being trained, and he was a friend of Philip the Beautiful. He was an admiral of Flanders at the time, and later on Bishop of Utrecht. In Utrecht, he had this painting in his dining room because it represented conversation and ambiguity, just like many other works by Bosch. And as the heir of his father, he wanted to pay tribute to the Golden Fleece Order, which he received in 1521 in the Brussels chapter. But he probably asked Bosch not to paint something in his usual style, where drawings were very clear on the surface. But he told Bosch to use a varnished surface. And what Bosch did exceptionally was to use an ex aequo style of drawing, but with a different type of pencil. You can see the variants that you can have in this type of work. Displacements, changes, lack of space for objects such as this Aachen jar that he placed here, either to put the money of this fake surgeon or for something else. All the details of the patient. You can see how even the hair has been painted in a very free manner, so typical of Bosch. So we can say that of all the works we have in Prado, this is the one that is in the worst condition. Its surface is worn out, and through that worn out surface, we want to point at these changes in the hand and other parts. You can see these displacements. You see the changes both in the bag and the shoes on the surface. Then he places them in a different place. So there are enough changes as to say that this is a prototype. There's very little underlying drawing, only in very little modeling. We only see modeling in some points. The poor quality of the surface, which has lost a lot of paint layer, has allowed us to see that he used just second phase of underlying drawing, but not the usual ones, but he used the color of the paint layer, which you can see behind this worn out surface, but which cannot be appreciated in the underlying drawing. And you find it in places where there are no folds on the surface. So it's hard to appreciate. You have to really look at it, and I didn't bring any images of that type for you to see it. But you can see all the changes he introduced. The ear of this friar, you can see that he corrected it on the surface. You can see all the things that he questioned. The landscape, for example. There's some who say that it's almost a Leonardo landscape. But in Bosch, he always painted landscapes in the same way. He worked very much in the lower part, but the upper part, he did it by freehand without drawing. You can see the trunks of the trees, or any of the details. What I was saying about poor quality, well, he left enough space for the palms of the hands, but not for the fingers. So the paint layer has been lost, and you feel like there are wounds, but it's not really wounds. And the landscape was painted very freely and directly. There's nothing here that doesn't belong to Bosch. All there is less scale and poor quality of preservation. It's as if he were trying to hide it with this kind of enamel surface. You can see the little dots, which are like the signature of Bosch. When it comes to Temptations of St. Anthony, we knew that this work had been manipulated. Originally, it was semicircular, and we got it in a rectangular shape, but we didn't know when that transformation took place. Our analytical department has been studying the pigments and the date of the structure, and we can see that all of these added features were done in the 19th century, after it arrived in the Prado Museum in 1839. We have looked at the panels in the lab, and we've restored the panels. The radiograph we had didn't allow us to see anything. Laura Alvarez has worked a lot on this, and now we can understand what this work was originally. It was also a late work of Bosch, 1510, 1511, 1512, something like that. We cannot say exactly the year. So the radiograph gives us an idea of what it was like originally, with landscapes similar to the Hay Wain, etc. But at a certain point in time, and we don't know exactly when, but it was in Flanders, probably around 1540 or 50, this work had a problem of preservation, which affected the saint. It didn't have anything to do with preparation. It had to do with the paint layer. We have found other works from the 16th century, but they were not damaged to this degree. It's as if there were something else. So they probably intervened, the restorers intervened in 1540 or 50, and what they did was to fill with leaves the top part, which is not original. What I mean is that these leaves were painted around 1530, 1540. We didn't want to eliminate those leaves. The restoration was done by Maria Antonia Lopez, because with the radiograph we saw what it was like originally, but we didn't know if we removed the leaves, we didn't know what we were going to find on the surface. So in this case, we decided to accept this painting as it was. If these leaves weren't here, we would see that the composition of Bosch was quite unusual regarding the Temptations of St. Anthony, because we see him inside the trunk of a tree. The book is in a bag back here, and he doesn't realize that he's being attacked by demons. But demons are not really attacking him. They're getting ready to attack. So let's look at the upper part. These are the trunks. We don't see the leaves here. The same happened in the Louvre painting, where a lot of leaves hid the mast of the ship. But in that case, they could be eliminated. someone said that there were no changes because the infrared we had before was not as good as the one we now have. We have these arrows here so that you can see some of the changes in the nose of a saint. This is used with the liquid medium. What's not usual is for all those leaves to be there, which hide the upper part of the painting. Also the beard. These are remnants of the damage to the paint layer. Also another change here. The support for this hay has changed position, and now it's less oblique. There are also changes in the hollow tree. We also see some other changes. These changes can also be seen in the house where Saint Anthony lives, which is in the middle of nature, because the desert in the 15th century didn't mean lack of life, but lack of people. There could be animals, there could be other elements, but not people. This is another change. You could see it also in the underlying drawing, but we prefer to take the radiograph. So the structure of the hut and the church was different before. The ceiling came all the way here before. And the door, well, the eye with the window of a church and the door were in this position, and then he changed the structure of the chapel. He made the roof smaller, not as flat. I'm referring to the roof of the hut. And even at times we see that he left some details in the back burner, ready to occupy this space. So we see here that he left some space for something as inconsistent as a trunk of a tree. And we see the details in the trunk of a tree, the water, with different thickness. We can see this in all of his works. This means that there was no room for some of the demons. This may be a smiling demon, but it's not the only one. In the Adoration of the Magi, the wolf that is about to eat the man had a white line, and it looked as if he were smiling. But we see how he worked on the surface, the relief he gave to all of these items. Even a detail like this, one of those jars that he liked to paint so much, with his light strokes. At the beginning, I couldn't understand why they were pouring water here, but when the enamel came off, we realized that here there was a small fire with clouds. It was a symbolic allusion to the fire of Saint Anthony. Fidels asked Saint Anthony to protect them in that way, so they're extinguishing the fire with the water. The Prado Museum believes that those three works are by Bosch. I'm fully convinced that they are Bosch. No one other than Bosch could have painted something like the table of the deadly scenes. And to think that the stone could be a copy, Philip of Burgundy was there. He saw the original in a house and he asked for a copy. That's impossible when Philip of Burgundy was the greatest champion of art in Burgundy at the time. He went to Rome with Gossard, who was his chamber painter. He gave away paintings. So he wasn't someone who was an amateur. No, he asked Bosch to paint it for him. And in the case of Felipe de Guevara, I can't resist the temptation to tell you that I can't understand how Felipe de Guevara, even though he was a bastard, I can't understand how he dared tell Philip II, I have a Bosch and yours is a copy, when he gave it to Escorial as Bosch by his own hand, and he died in front of it. Thank you.